Our 150th episode marks the start of Makeshift Stories' 10th year. Listen for our special anniversary look back at the last decade, Redux, starting at the end of September.
Is there a place and time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere or sometime along an indefinable line between the reasonable and the highly unlikely? Makeshift Stories presents a monthly journey into the improbable.
This month's story, 150, Led Astray. Somewhere and sometime, an unexpected encounter might reveal that history as you know it has been faked. This is Mission Control. Please confirm that manual input of the course correction was accepted by the navigation computer, Captain Zhu. Zhen Zhu, the mission commander, checked the red LED display for a moment longer than Mission Control expected. Captain Zhu? The voice was strained, which meant there was a greater concern on the ground than the mission handlers were letting on. Zhen took her time to confirm the numbers before answering. This is Usha 7, Mission Control, she replied calmly as if this was routine. Confirmed. Course correction has been accepted. Executing burn in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mark. A low rumble resonated through the Usha 7 command module, then abruptly cut out. Burn completed, Zhen said confidently into her headset. Tension in the capsule immediately waned. Arjun Doshi, the lander pilot, and Aisha Kalpar, the mission specialist and command module pilot, busily consulted the display panels at their stations, scrutinizing the results. There had been talk on board that they might even miss the moon entirely. The radio crackled again. We are rechecking the numbers now, Usha 7, but early results show you are still off course. Zhen cursed aloud, and concern thickened in the cramped space. They were so close. The mission had been textbook until the turnaround. Then something appeared to be skewing their trajectory. An EVA by Commander Arjun Varma had only confirmed what the instruments were saying. They weren't venting anything which would account for the drift. Please repeat, Mission Control? Zhen eyed her crew, trying not to show her rising anxiety. The burn was perfect, Usha 7, but the numbers aren't coming back the way we expected. There's still something nudging you off course. You won't overshoot the moon or crash into it. You'll just be injected into a different orbit. The astrogation team is recommending we go with it. We can't afford to dip any further into the fuel reserves for more corrections. They are working on an alternative landing site, probably in the Sea of Rains. Over. Mission Control, ever the voice of calm rationality, informed the crew of the fragile Usha 7 now only some 15,000 kilometers from the moon. The first human-piloted vehicle to venture beyond low Earth orbit. You mean Mar Imbrium? So should we continue to wake up the lander? Zhen asked, surprised by the location of the new landing site. Affirmative. Continue with the schedule. We'll inform you of the exact landing site as soon as the backroom boffins agree on something. Zhen smiled. We're still a go for landing. The crew high-fived. Zhen kept an eye on the uncooperative numbers, and Aisha, her uncooperative crew member. Why hadn't the burn completely corrected for the drift? It defied all logic. She felt someone brush against her shoulder, and turned expecting to see Arjun or Aisha, but no one was there. Her two crewmates were busy booting up and checking the lander's systems. They had trained together for months, doing the exact same things, until they could do them in their sleep. However, she didn't entirely trust her crew, especially Aisha. The recent strains in the Indo-Sino-Pakistani Cooperation Zone had pitted China and Pakistan against each other. The mission was intended to be a symbol of the alliance's solidarity and an example of their technical prowess to the rest of the world. But it was hard to believe that some of the politics hadn't affected the small crew. The hairs on the back of Zhen's neck stood up as if someone had passed close by, but there was no one there. She watched as inexplicably their course began to drift again. It was almost like something was patiently nudging them, forcing them into another orbit, she thought. Aisha, please confirm we're not venting anything. Aisha looked away from a floating step-sheet binder she and Arjun had been consulting, annoyed at the interruption. She checked several gauges, then said in a way that hinted she was ready to jump down Zhen's throat. All gas and fluid pressures are nominal, same as last time and every other time you've had me check. And before you ask, the instruments are in perfect working order. Zhen was about to call out Aisha for her attitude when she felt a fleeting breeze of something passing between her and the computer console. Did you feel the air move just then? She asked. No, we've been through that. There's no pressure leak in the cabin. Right, Arjun? Aisha said hotly. That's not what I meant. Zhen realized there was more than a hint of irritation in her voice. She needed to diffuse things. She reminded herself that the Pakistani government had led Aisha to assume she would be the mission commander, and hadn't told her until the last minute she had drawn the command module seat instead, and as a result, she wouldn't be setting foot on the moon. Aisha was a good geologist, so it made sense. She'd be searching for mineral deposits from orbit her resource-strapped country could exploit, while Zhen and Arjun took the lander to the surface. But Aisha had never fully accepted the role. It had been a festering problem since the announcement. All throughout training, Aisha had subtly challenged Zhen. But with the mission off course, there was no room for interpersonal rivalries. Zhen needed Aisha to willingly cooperate. It's probably just the moon messing with us. What do you think, Zhen? It doesn't want us landing on some sensitive energy vortex? Maybe you should meditate. We could help, so the moon knows we're coming with good intentions. Then the moon spirit will help us get back on course. Aisha laughed. She was taking a dig at Zhen's well-publicized spiritual retreat before the mission, which raised a few eyebrows in some conservative quarters, and added fuel to Aisha's open campaign to replace Zhen as mission commander. Maybe. Guess the only way to find out is land and ask the moon directly. Zhen jested, rolling with a thinly veiled insult. Zhen was alone in the command module. She had ordered an additional pressure test of the lander and command module. Aisha had complained in front of Zhen to Mission Control that the added test would put them behind schedule. But eventually, the safety zealots on the ground crew agreed with Zhen that it was merited, making Aisha even more sullen than usual. Zhen had been in the lander on the last test. Not that she really thought there might be something nefarious afoot, but, given the circumstances, she felt compelled to personally check the test from both sides. The protocol required the hatch between the two vehicles be closed, so the pressure in each cabin could be confirmed independently. If there was a leak, at least they would know which module to search. Hatch closed and sealed, Arjun confirmed through the ship-to-ship radio. The thought occurred to Zhen that if the leak was sabotage, the guilty party could simply detach, leaving her stranded. Confirmed, she replied. Starting test. She spun slowly in the microgravity to face the environmental controls. And as she did, a shadow passed over the navigation panel on the other side of the capsule. She jerked her head around to see what had caused it, but nothing was there, and the cabin light, which would have cast the shadow, was in the wrong place for it to have been her. Then, changes in some of the toggle switch positions on the nav console caught her attention. The ones which allowed reprogramming of the computer were on. She knew for certain she had switched them off after the last course correction. Additionally, the azimuth was set to a slightly different heading. A remote course correction by Mission Control? She wondered, but they hadn't felt a burn. I'm calling the test off, Zhen barked into her headset. Get back in here. Our course has been changed. The three Vyomanauts stared at the display, listening to the background static of an open link to Mission Control. Zhen had been careful not to touch anything or point out that the switches had been tampered with. This is Mission Control, Usha 7. The astrogation team has confirmed that you are no longer drifting off course. Whatever was causing it appears to have stopped. There were smiles all around the tiny cabin. We still don't know why the new trajectory is stable, but we have agreed on a new landing site. It was considered for a future mission. In the Sea of Rains, as we suspected, the Fra Mauro Formation. We are sending a new mission profile now. The target zone is a bit trickier. There are hills, but Luna 1 was designed to handle it. Next contact in 30 minutes before the lunar injection burn. Mission control out. The radio snapped off, leaving static again. Did you hear that? Arjun asked before Zhen closed the connection. There's something in the static. Another signal. Quiet. All three of them strained to hear. There appeared to be a voice, weaving in and out, in an archaic language none of them immediately recognized. Aisha drifted forward and flicked the radio off. There's nothing there. We're wasting power, she insisted, but Zhen was sure she had heard something too. Recognition finally dawned. It was English, she whispered. Arjun nodded in agreement. Nonsense, Aisha spat back. They don't have transmitters strong enough. Everyone knows their industrial infrastructure is rudimentary at best. Aisha finally noticed the switches on the navigation panel and raised an eyebrow. Zhen cut her off before she could say anything. That's the way I found them, Zhen said suspiciously, and glared at Aisha. Your couch is closest to the controls. Are you accusing me? Aisha was turning red with anger. You're more likely to sabotage the mission than I am. China would like to see it fail because we won the contract for the electronics. Aisha, the largest of the trio, drifted intimidatingly close to Zhen, taunting the other woman to physically lash out. Arjun put himself between the two and clicked the toggles to off. Probably didn't fully click into position, he suggested in a conciliatory tone. Easy to do in microgravity. It's hard to get your full weight on them, and the springs are extra stiff. The lights in the bridge connecting the two craft momentarily dimmed, as if something had passed through the tunnel. All three turned to see what had happened. I'll check the connections, Arjun offered. Maybe they were shaken loose during liftoff. Or it's the ghost? Zhen laughed, but found herself wondering about the string of apparently disconnected problems which had plagued the mission. This is Luna 1. Undocking confirmed. All panels show green. Zhen responded in a neutral, professional tone, despite her heart working overtime beneath the layers of her spacesuit. You are go for deorbit burn. Mission control confirmed after an uncomfortable delay. Zhen would never get used to the 2-second gap, which reminded her of just how far away from home they were. Or perhaps it was longer than usual. Was there something going on at mission control? Something they weren't saying? She dismissed the thought, not wanting to go down that road. We are commencing burn on my mark, Arjun, the lander pilot, replied. Mark! Zhen could feel the fragile craft shake. Arjun fired a brief pulse from one of the RCS thrusters, and Luna 1 began a gentle roll. With nothing to do for a moment, she turned in her couch to look out one of the small windows. But the angle was wrong, and all she saw was the reflection of a white spacesuit. Then realized theirs were blue. She quickly twisted around to look the other direction, to check if one of the equipment bags had shaken loose and caused a spacesuit-like reflection. But everything was in place. Zhen looked back at the window. The roll was complete now, and the view had changed. The glare of the moon's surface washing out any interior reflections. There were more pulses of the RCS thrusters as Arjun struggled to keep the cumbersome craft on the line he had been given. Luna 1, this is mission control. You are drifting off the bead. Acknowledge mission control. I'm trying to correct. Controls are sluggish, sort of the issue on the command module. I'm running out of fuel at this rate. We may have to go with it. Can you project to an alternate landing site? The radio crackled with static. Arjun looked nervously at the readouts. Come on, give me a new location, he muttered, concern growing in his voice. Finally, the radio came back to life. We concur. Go with it. We project you'll touch down in the hilly area about 10 kilometers north of the target landing site. You'll be okay, but you'll need to visually confirm the suitability of the touchdown location. Roger, Arjun dutifully returned, then quickly glanced at Zhen. I'll need you to spot for me. I'm turning the cabin lights off so you can see better. Zhen loosened her restraints, allowing her to lean over further and gain a better view below. The lunar surface seemed to be racing up at them until Arjun increased thrust. Then he spun the lander, so Zhen's window was facing their forward direction. Down 20, forward 10. Arjun began to bark a steady stream of updates to mission control. Zhen could hear the tension on both sides of the conversation as she concentrated on the lunar surface. She could make out large boulders now passing below them in the hilly gray landscape. Down 10, forward 5, fuel 15%. Do you see a spot we can put down, Zhen?
The next valley looks smoother. Can we make it?
It'll be too tight. Anything closer? Zhen strained forward further and concentrated. For some reason, the helmet connection to her suit seemed to force her to look left. It was as if someone was twisting her head to look in that direction. Then she saw it.
Over there,
she almost shouted.
To your left, 25 degrees. There's an area that's flatter and relatively clear of large rocks.
Arjun pulsed the RCSs, and Luna 1 changed direction, tilting slightly into the new path. As the surface swung by the portal, Zhen caught the momentary glint of something metallic on the ground in the harsh sunlight.
There's something down there, Arjun.
The pilot nodded, but kept concentrating on flying. This is mission control. Please repeat, Luna 1. I saw something on the ground. Metallic. Arjun motioned for Zhen to stop. Down 2, forward 3, 5% fuel. I'm putting down here, mission control. Zhen, any large rocks under us? Surface is uneven, but no rocks, she confirmed. There was an audible thump as the craft came down hard, then leaned over about 5 degrees. Zhen held her breath until the tilting stopped. We're down, Arjun shouted in relief. 2% fuel remaining, shutting down main engine. Zhen could hear shouts of joy and clapping, then congratulations spilled through the speakers. On another channel, Aisha received new orders. Usha 7, come in. Over.
This is Usha 7,
Aisha confirmed. You'll be overflying the landing site in a few minutes. We would like you to use the high-resolution video camera to scan the area.
Does this have anything to do with Zhen's comment just before touching down? She's made a few other odd observations,
Aisha added, hoping that the mission controllers had been taking her secret reports on Zhen's mental state seriously. We just want to confirm that nothing fell off the lander during descent. Disappointed, Aisha acknowledged the request and began to prep the camera. As mission commander, Zhen was first to step out onto the surface, quickly followed by Arjun. They only had a moment to take in the view. The scheduled mission control had given them was intense. Breathtaking, isn't it? It is, Zhen replied. It is what? Arjun queried through the suit-to-suit radio. Breathtaking, that's what you said, right? I didn't say anything. Let's get the science packages unloaded. Confused, Zhen stood for a few seconds longer, listening and scanning the gray, colorless horizon, feeling that there was something out there watching, something which had been observing them since they left Earth orbit. It was nonsense, she finally told herself, and hurried to help Arjun. She almost knocked him over as she rounded the lander to the sunward side. He stood frozen, staring at something in the distance, something shiny and metallic. She drew up beside him, and both watched in stunned silence as little puffs of dust marked the advancing end of a trail of footprints, which led away from them to the distant object. But there was no one making them. Zhen switched on the video camera mounted to the front of her EVA suit. A red indicator light on the inside of her helmet informed her the video link with mission control had been lost. No one else was seeing this. Aisha replayed the footage of the landing site one more time. She had sent it to Mission Control, but had received no further instructions. Although at the edge of the camera's resolution, it wasn't hard to make out what shouldn't have been there. The descent stage of another lander near Luna 1. It must have been what Zhen had seen during the descent. She was about to contact Zhen and Arjun when Mission Control crackled over the radio. Lieutenant Commander Kalpar. The voice was new, not one of the Mission Control staff. We've had a serious discussion down here. He paused, apparently conferring with someone off mic, before continuing. After much deliberation, we have decided to place you in command of the mission. Your reports have been greatly enlightening. The command codes for Usha 7 and Luna 1 have been changed remotely, and we have forwarded them to your personal inbox. You are to immediately terminate lunar surface activities. Commander Zhu and Pilot Dashi are not to leave the vicinity of the lander. They are to finish deploying the scientific package, then lift off. Do you understand? Aisha's heart jumped a beat. She hadn't expected this. Yes, she replied tentatively, still not quite believing what she had heard. Then more forcefully, yes, sir. You will not mention the video recording you took. You will be debriefed separately on return. Do you understand? No one is to know about the video. This is the cover story. Zhen leaned over and touched helmets with Arjun, so they could talk without using the radio. I lost the video uplink with Mission Control. I don't think it's a fault. Arjun nodded. I agree. I know we both saw the footsteps. Let's not mention them for now, but we need to see what that metallic thing is. Are you with me? Zhen asked. Arjun nodded again. The connection link turned green in Zhen's helmet, and Aisha's voice hissed through. There's been a change in the mission plan. Something about an approaching hurricane at our primary and secondary landing sites. We need to break orbit as soon as possible. Deploy the science package and return to the lander. Zhen motioned for Arjun to be quiet. I'm having trouble with your signal, Usha 7. We're to deploy the package and return? Please confirm. As she waited for a reply, she motioned in the direction of the footsteps, then led off at a fast, loping pace in the low gravity. Arjun followed. It took 15 minutes to get to the site where the ghostly footprints had stopped. Both stood in silence, looking at the stubby, gold foil-wrapped descent stage of another lander, surrounded by the detritus of discarded equipment. Zhen didn't recognize the design. Arjun pointed up, indicating the command module was still above the horizon. She nodded and spoke into her helmet microphone. Usha 7, we're having some trouble with the scientific equipment compartment door. We should have it fixed soon and be ready for ascent on your next orbit. Aisha confirmed she had heard the message and told them if they could not deploy the package by then to return anyway. Zhen turned her radio off and touched helmets with Arjun again. Don't say anything. I don't think we were supposed to see this. Both saw a puff of dust come up from the regolith on the sunward side of the old descent stage. They made their way hesitantly around to the spot where a new set of footprints had been made. The sun gleaming off the metal foil wrapped around the spider-legged machine caused their visors to dim, so it took a few minutes for Arjun to notice the small silver plaque riveted to the lander leg closest to them. He removed a rock hammer from his belt and pried the plaque off, examining it before handing it to Zhen. It was in English, an old language used in only a few regions of the contemporary world. She couldn't read the text, but the date in Arabic numerals was clear enough, 1971. And there was another number near it, 14, paired with a short word. They both stared at the date. If it was to be believed, the lander was 500 years old. Zhen carefully placed the plaque in a sample bag. Then she heard a voice, the same male voice she had heard when she first stepped onto the surface. It was almost inaudible, like the speaker had no air left in their lungs. Be careful. The truth is dangerous.
it is not in their interest for it to be known. Had she actually heard that, or was her mind playing tricks? She wasn't sure. Did you hear that? Arjun asked over the suit radio. When Jen and Arjun had settled into the ascent stage, all the instruments were already active, and an automated countdown was in progress. It was a safety feature, added at the last minute, to return the crew if they became incapacitated. Arjun and Jen looked at each other. Would they have launched without them? She thought about the voice, the ghostly footsteps, the mysterious course drift, and wondered if they had been intentionally led here to discover the other lander. But who would have had the resources to do that? And why the mysterious hocus-pocus stuff when hacking into and reprogramming the flight computers was all that would have been needed? Who would benefit? The ascend stage came to life, pressing Jen into her couch, forcing her to focus on the tasks at hand. The hatch to the command module swung open, and Aisha poked her head through. What took you so long? I even had time to transmit a high-res video of the landing site to ground control. We need to break orbit as soon as we can. She eyed Jen guiltily, then added, Circumstances have changed. I've been placed in command of the return mission. Jen tamped her anger and surprise down, and lied. I guessed that already. Arjun looked concerned. You sent them a video of the landing site, he confirmed, alarm edging into his voice. Yes, you're wasting time here, Arjun. We have only a few minutes left to break orbit to make our re-entry window. We have to jettison the ascent module now. Move! Aisha demanded, folding her arms defensively across her chest. Arjun nodded at Jen, and both stayed put in the ascent module. Jen pulled the lander plaque from the sample bag and shoved it towards Aisha. She snatched it out of the air and stared at it incredulously. Obviously a fake. Is this what Arjun and you had been planning from the beginning? Is this your true mission? Were you recruited to undermine the Alliance on international TV by finding that? She prodded at the floating piece of metal with one finger, sending it spinning at Arjun. There's never been another world power as advanced as the Alliance. You both know that. Every 6-year-old knows that. A mission 500 years ago, originating in the Americas? Ludicrous. No one will believe it. We have photos and video too. I'm going to send them in the next mission report. Jen said defiantly, already suspecting it was pointless. Mission Control would never release them. That's why they lost the live video link on the surface. No one was going to find out. Fake. Preloaded into the cameras before we left, Aisha theorized. I'm not going to help you turn this mission into a political farce to undermine the Alliance. I've locked both of you out of the computer and set the main engine for an automatic burn in 5 minutes. We're leaving. The problem started almost as soon as the burn initiated. The main command module engine fired longer than it should have. They would have come in too shallow and fast and bounced off the Earth's atmosphere back into space. Next, the high-gain antenna failed, and communications with the ground was reduced to text only. Jen couldn't have sent her photos even if Aisha had allowed her to. Ground Control claimed to be working on a new re-entry scenario as Jen rechecked their Delta V on the computer under the watchful eye of Aisha. Arjun was looking over data from the burn, trying to determine what went wrong. I think we can adjust our trajectory to come in at a steeper angle. It will keep us from skipping off the top of the atmosphere, but we'll be going too fast to make it down in one piece. Jen noted, ignoring Aisha. They'll find a solution, Aisha proclaimed confidently. They always do. Arjun looked up from his work. I'm not so sure there's anything to be solved. What do you mean? Aisha snapped back angrily. From the logs, it looks like the length of the burn was changed remotely. Arjun stared at Aisha accusingly. So, there's nothing to fix. What was in that video you sent them? Aisha said nothing, and turned away from Zhen and Arjun to stare out of the portal. "They'll fix this," she insisted with less confidence than before. "They assured me." The message light on the commander's console started to blink. "You should read it," Zhen suggested after a few moments. Aisha turned away from the portal and typed in her code with one hand, covering the keys so Zhen and Arjun couldn't see, then watched green text scroll onto the small screen. She seemed confused and upset. "What? How did you—" she began, but Zhen pushed her away from the screen before she could complete her sentence. "It says, they're not going to let you land. It's better to have 3 martyrs than the truth be known. I'll be in touch again shortly." "That didn't come from ground control," Arjun noted cautiously. "The radio link to the low-gain antenna is down, and it's not a failure." "So, mission control can't communicate with us? Fix it," Aisha demanded, a slight quiver beginning to creep into her voice. She wasn't looking as sure as she had a few moments ago. "There's nothing to fix. The systems are being shut down remotely," Arjun shrugged. "Do you have a way to override ground control?" "What did you see in the video you sent?" Zhen had joined Arjun in front of the engineering station. It was 2 against 1. Yet Aisha held her ground defiantly in front of the command console and glared back, challenging them. The message light began to flash one more time. "See, you're both wrong. They fixed the problem." She turned slightly, keeping both in view, and read the new message. "You need to believe me. You are in danger," she mouthed as she read. "How are you doing this?" Aisha screamed, and without warning launched herself toward the other biomonauts, knocking them away from the engineering station. Arjun flew up, bumping his head on the hatch, and Zhen tumbled into the pilot's couch, twisting her leg. She yelped in pain. Aisha desperately scanned the readout Arjun had on the display. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, calling up other data. Then she finally slumped into the engineering couch and put her head into her hands and kneaded her face. "What was on the video, Aisha?" Zhen probed again, grimacing as she disentangled her leg from the arm of the acceleration couch. Aisha extracted her face from her hands, eyes red, cheeks flush. "There's no point now. We're all dead anyway. They lied. They said I'd have a separate debriefing after touchdown if I kept my mouth shut and followed orders." "Aisha, what did you see?" "A second landing site. I'm not supposed to say anything about it. They wanted you off the surface before you found it. They only released the video of you getting out of the lander, then claimed the link malfunctioned." Zhen and Arjun glanced at each other. The radio crackled to life. Aisha checked the panel and looked puzzled. "That's not coming from mission control. The antenna is still disconnected." The male voice Zhen had first heard on the lunar surface emerged from the static. "There is a way to get you down, so your story can be told. I'm sending you new data for the navigation computer." The message light on the command console lit up. "Who are you?" Zhen demanded, drifting closer to the radio controls. "Was it you on the surface? Are you the reason we landed near that ancient site?" She turned up the volume until painfully loud static filled the tiny capsule. At the edge of audibility, the voice responded in a whisper. "Just a friend who believes there's more than what meets the eye and wants to reclaim their place in history and get you back safely. All I ask is for you to set the record straight." There was a surge of static, forcing all 3 to cover their ears. Then the radio went dead. The re-entry was far from textbook, and when they finally crashed down in the great central desert of North America, they knew they had been lucky. They sprung the hatch open and spilled out onto the parched ground, bruised but happy. Zhen felt a touch on her shoulder, and for a brief moment, intense satisfaction welled through her. Then the feeling evaporated. She looked around, knowing it would be the last time, and unsurprisingly found herself alone. Arjun and Aisha had walked to the top of a small rise and were waving frantically at a group of distant mounted figures riding toward them. Nothing of importance was supposed to have happened here half a millennium ago, other than the quick rise and fall of a minor power. Yet Arjun clutched the sample bag containing an artifact that hinted at a very different story. Makeshift Stories is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB Financial. To listen to other great APN podcasts, such as Creative Block or Pop Cycle, please head over to albertapodcastnetwork.com. Learning is a lifelong process. More and more people are finding themselves returning to college or university mid-life to change careers, update their knowledge, or pursue new opportunities. Returning to the classroom after several decades can be a daunting but rewarding experience. Follow Katrina Ingram each month as she chronicles her personal journey and the stories of other midlife learners who are currently enrolled or have recently completed a post-secondary program. Back to School Again is presented by Norquest College and is an affiliate member of the Alberta Podcast Network. Check out Back to School Again at backtoschoolagain.ca. Makeshift Stories is released once a month between the 15th and the 20th. This month's story was written by Alan V. Hare and read by Mitchell Tew. Opening and closing music was composed and recorded by David Hume. If you'd like to connect with us, please send an email to makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. You can help us out by writing a review on Stitcher Radio or Apple Podcasts or any of your favorite podcast services. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivative license, which means that you are free to share our stories. Just remember to credit us and don't alter anything.